The call came in at 2:17 a.m. At first, dispatch thought it was a pocket dial, the kind you get from old flip phones when someone rolls over in bed. All that could be heard was breathing, slow, shallow, like the caller was afraid that even the sound of air moving through his lungs might give something away. Then a man spoke. His voice was low, thin, stretched tight with effort. I don't think I have much time." The dispatcher asked him to repeat himself. He didn't. Instead, he said, "There's someone standing outside my window." Rain crackled faintly through the phone, the same rain that was hitting the dispatcher's office in the county seat nearly 30 miles away. "How long has this person been there?" she asked. There was a pause. You could hear the man swallowing. 3 nights, he said. 3 nights in a row. The dispatcher began typing, asking for his address, but the man kept talking, like he was afraid if he stopped, whatever was out there would get closer. "It doesn't move. It just stands there, right in the yard, close enough that I can see its face." The dispatcher told him help was on the way, even though she still didn't know where he was. She asked if he could lock his doors. "They're locked," he said. "They've been locked since the first night." Another pause. His breathing changed, faster now. "I tried not to look tonight," he whispered, "but I did." The rain on the line grew louder, mixed with something else, a faint, hollow sound, like wind passing through tall grass. "It doesn't blink." The dispatcher asked him what he meant. "It hasn't blinked once," he said. "Not in 3 nights. I watched it for almost an hour. Its eyes just stay open, like it doesn't need to close them." She told him to move away from the windows, to go somewhere safe. "I can't," he replied. "If I turn my back on it, I think it'll come closer." In the background, something creaked. Maybe a floorboard, maybe a door. The man's voice dropped even lower. "It knows I'm watching it." The dispatcher called his name again. He didn't answer. There was a sudden rush of sound, a sharp breath, a startled noise, and then the call ended. No one ever picked up when dispatch called back. By the time deputies traced the signal, the house was empty. No signs of struggle. No blood, no broken doors. Just a single set of wet footprints on the porch, leading up to the window, and none leading away. Blackwood Hollow is the kind of place most people have never heard of, even if they've lived in the same state their whole lives. A rural county made up of farmland, narrow roads, and scattered houses that sit miles apart. The sort of place where everyone knows everyone, and anything unusual becomes a topic of conversation by the next morning. Or it should have. Over the past 5 years, 12 people vanished there. Not all at once. Not in a way that caused headlines. A farmhand who never came home. A retired couple whose truck was found still running in their driveway. A teenager who went out to check on the horses and was never seen again. Each case was handled quietly. A missing persons report, a few searches, then silence. No bodies were found. No suspects were named. No official explanation was ever released. What little information did exist was scattered across old police logs, half-filled notebooks, and a few recordings that were never meant to leave the evidence room. And for years, no one outside Blackwood Hollow ever bothered to ask why, because what really happened there was quietly erased. Blackwood Hollow never looked like the kind of place where people disappear. During the day, it was just another farming county. Long gravel roads cutting through endless rows of corn. Weathered barns standing in wide open fields. Old tractors parked beside silos that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Neighbors waved when you passed. Doors stayed unlocked. Kids rode their bikes down roads so empty you could hear them coming from a mile away. It was quiet in a way that felt earned. People worked hard here. They knew each other. When someone's cow got loose, 3 farmers would show up to help. When a storm rolled through, barns were checked and fences were fixed before breakfast. Nothing about Blackwood Hollow suggested danger. Not at first. The first thing people noticed was the animals. It started with a dairy farm on the east side of the county. One morning, the owner went out to milk his cows and found 3 of them lying in the grass behind the barn. Their eyes were open. Their bodies were still warm. There were no bite marks, no blood, no signs of struggle. They looked as though they had simply fallen over. A few days later, it happened again. Different farm. Same thing. Cattle, goats, even a horse. All dead. None of them eaten. none of them torn apart. The local vet couldn't explain it. Then the dogs began to change. In Blackwood Hollow, dogs lived half their lives outdoors. They ran through fields, slept on porches, and followed their owners everywhere. But one by one, they stopped going out at night. People would open their doors and call them. The dogs would stand in the doorway, ears back, staring into the dark. Some of them trembled. Some of them whimpered. None of them would step outside. Even when their owners tugged on their collars, they resisted. Even when they were dragged into the yard, they pulled themselves back toward the house, as though they were trying to escape something their owners couldn't see. Then came the farmer named Ellis Ward. Ellis owned a small patch of land near the tree line at the edge of the county. One evening, he called the sheriff and said something was wrong. He didn't say someone was trespassing. He said someone was watching him. Ellis told the dispatcher that he had been out in his field repairing a fence when he noticed movement between the trees. He looked up and saw a figure standing just inside the woods. At first, he thought it was a neighbor, so he raised his hand and waved. The figure raised its hand too. Ellis took a step to the left. The figure stepped the same way. He leaned down to pick up a tool. The figure leaned down as well. It stayed there, just beyond the trees, copying every motion he made. Ellis said he tried to shout at it, but when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. He dropped his tools and ran back to his house without turning around. When deputies searched the tree line later, there was no one there. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Over the next week, more people reported things that didn't sit right. Shadows in fields where no one was standing. Voices heard just beyond open windows. Movement at the edge of the corn rows that stopped when someone looked too closely. The rain kept falling through all of it. Soft at first, then steady, then heavy enough that it soaked the ground and darkened the roads. Blackwood Hollow still looked the same, but people began locking their doors, and no one could quite explain why else. The first person to vanish in a way no one could explain was a farmhand named Michael Rourke. Michael had worked the northern fields for nearly 10 years. He was quiet, dependable, and known for never missing a morning shift. He lived in a small trailer just beyond a stretch of corn that reached nearly as high as the power lines. Every day at 5 a.m., he drove the same gravel road to the same farm. On the morning he disappeared, his truck was still there. The engine was running. The driver's door was open. Rain had been falling through the night, and the ground around the vehicle was dark and soaked. Deputies found muddy footprints leading away from the truck and into the cornfield. They were deep and uneven, as if Michael had been walking fast. They followed the prints for almost 50 yards, and then they stopped. Not faded, not scattered. They ended in a single place between two rows of corn, as if Michael had been lifted straight up from the ground. There were no marks, no drag lines, nothing to show where he had gone. His phone was still in the truck. His keys were still in the ignition. By afternoon, search teams were combing the fields. By nightfall, they found nothing. 2 days later, Michael's wife received a voicemail. It came from his number. The message was nearly a minute long, but most of it was quiet, just faint breathing and a soft sound like rain hitting something hollow. Then Michael spoke. "Please, don't come looking for me." His voice sounded thin, like it was being pushed through a narrow space. "I can see the house from here," he said. "The lights are on, but I'm not outside anymore." There was a pause. "It keeps trying to sound like me." The message ended. Police traced the call to a tower near the cornfields where Michael vanished. There was no sign of him. After that, people in Blackwood Hollow stopped calling it bad luck. They started calling it something else. After Michael Rourke vanished, the nights in Blackwood Hollow stopped belonging to the people who lived there. They belonged to the voices. The first call came from a house at the southern edge of the county. A family reported knocking at their front door just after 3 in the morning. They hadn't answered it. The voice on the other side was soft, calm, and familiar. It was their son. He had disappeared 2 weeks earlier. The voice said it was cold. It said it was raining. It asked them to please unlock the door. They stayed silent in the dark while the knocking continued, slow and steady for almost 10 minutes. When deputies arrived, there was no one outside, just wet footprints leading up to the door, and none leading away. Over the next few nights, similar calls came in, voices calling from barns, from fields, from empty roads. Always someone the listener recognized. A brother, a wife, a child. Church cameras captured figures standing in the rain. They didn't move. They didn't react to the wind. When the pastor went outside to see who was there, the yard was empty. A woman on Maple Road said something was living inside her barn. She heard it walking at night, slow and careful, like it was learning how. Her animals kept going missing. Their stalls were left open in the morning. There were no tracks leading out. And every time she stood near the barn doors, she swore she could hear someone breathing inside. The rain kept falling through all of it. Steady, endless, like it was washing something into the ground. By the time the sun sank behind the trees in Blackwood Hollow, the county had stopped trying to explain the disappearances. It was no longer about lost farmhands or vanished children. It was about what had always been there, quietly waiting, in the shadows between fields, beneath the soil, and inside the spaces people assumed were empty. An old historian, long retired, began piecing together records no one else remembered. County land deeds from the 1800s, diaries from settlers, letters hidden in the attic of the town hall. They told a story that the living had spent generations trying to forget. The land the county now sat on had once been sacred, not in the way people visit and pray, but in the way the earth demands obedience. Rituals were performed here long ago by a group of settlers who feared the unseen. They called it the quieting, though no one could explain exactly what was being silenced. The rituals stopped when the last elder died. No one in the modern county remembered or wanted to. The historian's discovery explained the pattern of disappearances. It explained the dead animals, the footprints that ended in midair, the figures that mimicked movements, the voices calling from nowhere. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, and it was aware. The entity, or whatever had waited under the ground and behind the trees, could imitate humans, could wear their faces, could speak in voices that sounded familiar. It could only enter spaces if recognized, if acknowledged, if someone looked directly at it. That explained why Michael Rourke had been lifted from the ground. That explained the knocking at the doors and the barns where something was learning to live. All of Blackwood Hollow had been a trap for years, and now, with no rituals to contain it, nothing was keeping it in the shadows. The historian whispered to anyone who would listen. It's patient, it's learned, it waits until someone trusts it. When the rain fell that night, steady and unbroken, people swore they could hear whispers in the corn, voices carrying names they knew, asking for help, calling them into the darkness. The town had become a stage, the entity had learned its lines, and the audience was trapped in the house. By the time the rain had fallen for the third consecutive week, Blackwood Hollow was no longer a place anyone could recognize. Houses that had once welcomed laughter and light now seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the storm. Roofs sagged with the relentless wet. Windows reflected nothing but their own dim glow. Empty streets ran like veins through the town, slick with water, silent but for the occasional drip of rain from a sagging gutter. Families who had once shared meals and quiet evenings had retreated behind locked doors. Some never came out again. Lights flickered in kitchens where no one moved. Shadows shifted where they should not have been. The rain carried whispers. Not from wind, not from trees, but from voices that spoke names no one dared call aloud. Names of children, of husbands, of fathers. Names that had vanished weeks before. One survivor, a woman named Clara, recorded everything on her old camcorder. She captured the slow approach of figures through cornfields. They moved with purpose, but almost cautiously, as though they were learning how to act human. She followed them to the edge of her property, her camera capturing every soaked stalk bending under the rain. The figures stopped when she stopped. They mirrored her movements. One raised an arm, and another, miles away in another field, did the same. The sheriff, brave or foolish enough to investigate, walked into the storm. The radio crackled, then silence. The deputy who went after him returned alone, drenched, eyes wide, unable to speak of what he had seen. By dawn, it became clear. The town would never be the same. Homes were left furnished, doors locked, cars in driveways. The land had been abandoned by the living, but not by what watched from the fields. Years later, a journalist entered Blackwood Hollow. hoping to document the truth. He walked along muddy streets, stepped over cracked boards, and found remnants of lives paused mid-motion. Toys still scattered in yards, laundry still drying on lines, rusting bicycles. He recorded everything. Then he heard it, a voice calling his name. Soft, familiar, coming from the house he had just passed. He turned. Nothing, just rain. He stepped inside. A chair creaked, then silence again. But in the corner, a shadow moved just slightly, too fluid to be human. He tried to leave, but the doors seemed farther away than they had been. His breathing caught. The rain pounded outside, masking what moved around him. And then, faintly, the voice whispered again. "We've been waiting." The journalist never left, at least not alive. Blackwood Hollow remains, empty to the eye, full to the mind, waiting for anyone to notice, waiting for anyone to believe. And if you ever go there in the rain, you might hear your own name carried on the wind, inviting you to stay forever. Because some places do not forgive curiosity, because some stories do not end.